She stepped off the wagon with dust on her boots and a letter clutched tight, his letter full of promises. But when he saw her standing honest in the sun, he didn't open his arms. He opened his mouth. "I won't marry no saloon girl," he said, loud enough for the whole town to hear. Laughter, gasps, a child whispering, "Mama, what's a saloon girl?" She stood there, shame burning in her chest. But she didn't cry. She turned to leave, slow, proud, alone. She came for love, with a letter in her hand and hope in her heart. But in Dust Hollow, truth wasn't welcome, until one man stepped from the silence and gave her more than pity. He offered her a future. Before she was Eliza Hartley of Dust Hollow, she was just Ruby Red. A name whispered in smoke-filled rooms, a voice drifting through the halls of O'Malley's Saloon in St. Louis. But the truth, like most things in her life, ran far deeper than the lipstick and lace. Eliza was born in the back room of a boarding house to a laundress who worked herself into an early grave. By the age of 7, she'd learned 2 things: that hunger never waits and that no one's coming to save you. When her mother died of fever one cold winter, Eliza became a ward of the streets. She wasn't sent to a church orphanage or taken in by kin. There were none. Just her and her younger brother, Nate. Nate was always sick, born too small, lungs too weak. He coughed through every season, and when the coal smoke thickened the air, he'd gasp like a fish on the riverbank. Eliza would wrap her own coat around him and lead him through alleyways searching for warmth, for bread, for mercy. By the time she was 14, she'd scrubbed floors in bakeries, shelled peas in kitchens, and cleaned up after men who treated her as less than dirt. But none of it paid enough to keep Nate fed and warm. So when a matronly voice behind a cracked door asked, "Can you sing?" Eliza nodded. O'Malley's Saloon wasn't the brothel some folks made it out to be. Not completely. It was a place where businessmen came to drink away their regret, soldiers nursed old wounds, and drifters played cards with ghosts. Eliza sang Irish ballads and old lullabies, her voice soft but steady. Men would go silent just to hear her. But they also reached for her waist, slipped coins into her hand like they were buying more than music. She never sold her body, not once. But she did sell the illusion that she might. That alone was enough for the world to write her off. When she was 17, Nate took a turn for the worse. Fever wrung the strength from him like water from cloth. Eliza carried him through sleet and slush, barefoot to a back alley doctor who didn't ask questions. He gave her a brown vial and said, "Pray hard." She did. But prayers didn't hold heat, and the medicine didn't hold life. Nate died that night, small and still in the bed they shared. Eliza wrapped him in her only blanket and sang him one last song. She didn't remember the words, only the ache they left in her throat. After that, she stopped singing for money. Not because she was ashamed, but because every note reminded her of what she'd lost. Months passed. The city moved on, but Eliza couldn't. She drifted from saloon to saloon, refusing hands, refusing pity, refusing to die like the girl before her. But slowly her heart hardened. Her name became a whisper. Ruby Red, they called her, the girl with sorrow in her voice and fire in her eyes. Then, one rainy afternoon, she found a crumpled page left behind on a saloon table. A Missouri farming bulletin. At the bottom, an ad. Widowed cattleman seeks honest, kind woman. Not looking for perfection, just someone to build a life with. Letters welcome. Jedediah Mercer, Dust Hollow. She read it twice, then again. It felt foolish, desperate, but it also felt like something cracked open, just enough to breathe. That night, by the flicker of a candle, Eliza wrote. She didn't tell him about Nate, didn't say how many nights she'd gone without food. She didn't mention O'Malley's by name, but she didn't lie either. She told him she'd sung in taverns to survive, that she had no family left, that she could cook, sew, read, and hold her own, that she wanted to be someone's partner, not their property. She ended the letter with a line that wasn't written, but lived between the ink. Please, just see me for more than what I've had to become. She folded the letter with hands that had known hunger, grief, and grit. Then she walked 5 blocks through pouring rain to the postmaster, handed over the last nickel she owned, and mailed her heart to a stranger. She waited. Weeks passed, and then an envelope. addressed to Miss Eliza Hartley. The train was hours behind schedule, but Eliza didn't mind. She spent the ride clutching the letter that had changed everything, reading and rereading its careful script like it was scripture. Kindness and honor. That's what Jedediah Mercer had promised. A man with land, steady hands, and a heart tired of silence. She imagined his voice, his eyes. She imagined being seen and not judged. When she finally stepped off the wagon in Dust Hollow, the sun was high, burning down on the crooked roofs and dirt-packed streets. Townsfolk leaned out of doorways. Boots scuffed against porch wood. A bell tolled somewhere in the distance, and with it, her heartbeat rose. She smoothed her worn dress, adjusted her gloves, and scanned the boardwalk until her eyes found him. Jedediah stood near the general store, arms folded, hat tipped low, face unreadable. He was taller than she pictured, broader too, but his gaze held no warmth, only scrutiny. She approached, slow and steady. "Mr. Mercer?" she asked, voice tight with nerves. "That's me. I'm Eliza Hartley. I wrote to you." A whisper rustled through the gathered crowd. Jedediah's mouth curled downward. "You're not what I expected," he said. She offered him the letter, yellowed from her grip. "You wrote this. You said you wanted someone real. I came because—" "You came," he cut in, "and forgot to mention you worked in a saloon?" The air thickened. A woman near the feed store gasped. Another crossed herself. A boy snickered behind his mother's skirt. "I didn't forget," Eliza said, voice firmer. "I told you I'd served in taverns. I was honest." Jedediah stepped closer, voice raised. "Serving drinks, singing songs. That's the polite way to say you sold yourself in whiskey-soaked corners." A preacher's wife, eyes sharp beneath her bonnet, whispered loud enough to carry. "She's the kind that sings for dimes and sins for supper." Heat rushed up Eliza's neck, but she did not back down. She unfolded the letter and read aloud, her voice steady despite the fire behind her ribs. "If you are willing to take a chance on a stranger, I swear I will meet you with kindness and honor." She looked up at him. "That's what you wrote." Jedediah didn't flinch. "I changed my mind. I won't marry no saloon girl." The crowd murmured, shame rippling through them like a fever. A child's voice pierced the tension. "Mama, what's a saloon girl?" The mother shushed him quickly. Eliza took a slow breath, like swallowing a blade. Her eyes met Jedediah's, hard, proud, scared. "You don't want real, Mr. Mercer. You want a storybook. A woman without scars, without memory. I came here with truth in my hand, and you spit on it." She dropped the letter at his feet. No one moved. Then from the edge of the square, an old man doffed his hat. Others looked away, not from her, but from Jedediah. Eliza turned slowly. Her boots crunched on the dirt, each step deliberate. She didn't run, didn't cry. Her shame didn't belong to her, because the truth wasn't dirty. Survival wasn't sin. But in this town, being a woman with a past was treated worse than being a man with none. Narration, commentary. Dust Hollow wasn't the first place to turn on a woman who refused to lie. And Jedediah Mercer wasn't the first man who asked for honesty and flinched when it arrived. Because in a world built on appearances, truth is a dangerous thing, especially when it comes from a woman who dares to carry her past openly. In that moment, Eliza wasn't rejected for who she was. She was punished for refusing to pretend. Winter came early to Dust Hollow that year. Snow clung to the edges of the roofs like unspoken things. The nights grew longer, the wind sharper. But inside Silas Maddox's modest ranch house, a fragile warmth had taken root. It didn't speak loudly, didn't declare itself. It lingered in the way Eliza refolded his shirts, or how Silas set out 2 cups of coffee each morning without comment. It was quiet, but it was becoming something. And then, as storms often do, the past returned. It happened in town. A stranger, drunk, loud, and reeking of sour rye, slumped against the hitch post outside the feed store. He recognized her the way men remember women they never truly knew. "Ain't that Ruby Red?" he slurred, too loud. "Sang at O'Malley's down in St. Louis. Hell of a voice. Hell of a mouth on her, too, if I recall." The words dropped like stones in still water. Heads turned. Eyes narrowed. Someone laughed behind a gloved hand. Eliza froze, a sack of grain half lifted in her arms. She didn't speak, didn't deny it, Silas heard it. From across the street near the smithy. He didn't move. He didn't confront. He only looked at her. And for the first time since she arrived, Eliza couldn't read what she saw in his eyes. That night, the silence between them stretched wider than any prairie. She moved through the house like a ghost, folding towels that didn't need folding, boiling water for tea she wouldn't drink. Silas sat by the fire, his jaw tight, his hands motionless. "Say it," she whispered finally, not turning to face him. "Say what?" "Whatever it is you're thinking. Spit it out so I can start packing." He didn't answer, and that silence said more than cruelty ever could. By dawn, she was gone. The fire was cold, her shawl missing from its hook. The small wooden comb he had carved and left by her mirror lay neatly folded in a handkerchief, untouched. Silas found the note on the kitchen table, the same handwriting as her first letter, but this time without hope. "You told me I was the first quiet you'd felt in years, but maybe quiet isn't peace. Maybe it's just space to forget. I won't be the reason you remember things you were trying to leave behind." He stood in that kitchen, the snow thickening outside the window, the wind howling through the cracks in the doorframe, and something in him broke. The ride into town was brutal. The storm had thickened into a white curtain. He rode hard, pushing Dusty, his old gelding, faster than he had in years. Tracks in the snow were already disappearing, but he followed, like memory, faint but real. By the time he reached the train station, it was nearly buried. The windows iced over. The door groaned on its hinges. Inside on the far bench sat Eliza, coat pulled tight, satchel in her lap, hair damp with melted snow. She looked up when he stepped inside. Her eyes widened. "You came." "Of course I did," he said, breathless, snow melting down his back. "You didn't say anything. You just looked at me like I'd turned to dust." "I wasn't looking at you," he said quietly. "I was looking at a man I used to be. One who let someone leave without saying what mattered most." She shook her head, tears shining but unfallen. "You don't know what you're asking. I'm not someone you bring home to town meetings and church picnics. I'm not your late wife." He stepped closer. "No, you're not." She was sweet, soft, but she didn't make it through the storm. A pause, the wind screamed through the broken window. "You did." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small silver ring, plain and weathered. "This was hers. She would have liked you. You're the only person who ever made this house feel full again." Eliza's voice cracked. "I've done things I'm not proud of. So have I. But you are not your past, Eliza, and I love every piece of you, because it made you." Silence. Then she stepped forward, hand trembling as she touched his chest. "If you mean it." "I do," he smiled. "That's the easiest I do I've ever said." Shri. And there, as snow whispered against the station walls and the train sat waiting but untouched, two people who thought they'd been broken by the past finally stepped into something new, together. They were married 3 days after the storm broke. There were no ribbons, no flowers, no guests except the sky and the stubborn land that stretched for miles around. But Eliza wore the same dress she'd arrived in, neatly mended at the seams, and Silas wore his cleanest shirt, his hair still damp from the bathwater he'd boiled himself. The wedding took place in a clearing behind the house, where the first green shoots of spring dared to break through the thawing soil. A preacher came from 2 towns over, hitching a mule in sleet just to stand in the wind and say a few words over them. Just as the vows began, a figure arrived on horseback, slim, tall, and wrapped in a wool shawl. Silas's eyes widened. "Clara." His sister dismounted and walked straight to Eliza, grasping both her hands. "You're braver than most women I've met," she said, voice strong. "Let's make sure they all see it." She stayed for the ceremony, standing by Silas with quiet pride. There were no townsfolk in attendance. Word had spread, of course, but few dared show their faces. The whispers still trailed Eliza like smoke. Saloon girl, whiskey songbird, not fit for marriage. But neither bride nor groom looked back toward Dust Hollow. They said their vows to the earth, to the wind, to the sky that had watched them both survive. Life as husband and wife didn't transform overnight, but it did grow, steady and unshakable as fence posts sunk deep into prairie dirt. Eliza didn't ask for permission to belong. She simply acted like she did. She cleaned the spare room, planted early cabbage in the garden bed, and kept the hearth burning even when the sky grumbled. One morning, while Silas was off mending a broken gate, she hung a small wooden sign outside the barn. Music lessons for young ears and eager fingers. At first, no one came. Then one little girl showed up, shy, barefoot, clutching a penny and a wooden spoon as a drumstick. Eliza didn't charge her a cent. She just placed a worn banjo in the girl's lap and said, "Show me the rhythm in your heart." By summer, 6 more children came. By autumn, there were 14. They sat in rows learning hymns, lullabies, and Irish folk tunes. Eliza taught them to breathe from their bellies, to clap with purpose, to respect silence between notes as much as the music itself. The town still whispered, but the tone had shifted. Some mothers came to listen from behind the garden fence, pretending they were just passing by. A shopkeeper's wife left a basket of apples on the porch. The preacher's daughter wrote a letter asking if Eliza would consider leading a Sunday hymn. It didn't erase the past, but it softened the shape of it. On the frontier, reputation wasn't rewritten with speeches. It was rebuilt in actions. The tending of a wound, the kindness of a shared meal, the sound of children singing beneath a wide sky. Eliza didn't argue for her place in Dust Hollow. She just earned it, one honest day at a time. She and Silas shared long, quiet evenings, her head on his shoulder, his calloused hand on hers. No riches came, no children of their own, but their home was full of laughter, of music, of peace. And for Eliza Hartley, once called Ruby Red, that was more than enough. Years passed the way seasons do on the prairie, slow, steady, and without apology. The house never grew larger. The barn sagged a little more each spring. The fields yielded just enough. And yet the home that Eliza and Silas built together stood firm through every storm. They were never rich. No children ever came. But somehow their life was still full, rich in ways the town's ledgers couldn't measure. Every morning, Silas rose before dawn. He fed the animals, repaired what needed fixing, and left a tin cup of coffee warming on the stove. And every evening, Eliza would sit on the porch, a quilt around her shoulders and her banjo across her lap, playing soft songs to the dusk. She never played for crowds again, but the land listened. The birds paused. The wind, it seemed, leaned in. Children still came for music lessons, though fewer now that years had thinned her voice and stiffened her fingers. But still they came, because there was something sacred in how she touched the keys, how she spoke of rhythm and rest, and holding space between notes like it mattered. One summer evening, golden light spilling across the fields, a small boy stood at the edge of the garden fence with his mother. His hair was a mess of curls, his hands sticky with peaches. He tugged on her skirt and whispered loud enough to carry, "Mama, do angels live here?" His mother didn't answer right away. She only watched Eliza strumming on the porch, eyes half closed, lips forming the old melody of a lullaby long forgotten. Inside the house, Silas sat by the window, listening like he always did, quiet, still, grateful. The whispers about her past never fully disappeared. Now and then, someone new in town would lower their voice and say, "You know who she was, right?" But more often now, the answer that followed wasn't cruel. It was reverent. "She's the one who made that ranch a home. She taught my daughter her first hymn. You should hear her play when the stars come out." Narration, Sharn commentary. Love doesn't always arrive like lightning. Sometimes it creeps in like fog, soft, persistent, wrapping around the broken places until you barely remember they were ever there. Eliza and Silas didn't build their life in sunlight. Their love bloomed in shadow, in the quiet after grief, in the pauses between heartbeats, in the space where judgment had once lived. They didn't need a child to feel complete. They raised a generation of music. They didn't need wealth to feel rich. They had morning coffee, shared glances, and a porch that faced the setting sun. Toward the end, Eliza's voice faded. Her hands trembled more. But still, she sang, not for them, not for him, for herself, because music had once been a means of survival. Now it was a mark of peace. Silas would listen from the barn door, leaning against the frame, arms crossed, a soft smile on his weathered face. And sometimes when the light was just right, he'd say, "That song sounds like the way home feels." They lived quietly, fiercely, without apology. And long after they were gone, the story of Eliza Hartley and Silas Maddox wasn't told in scandal anymore. It was told in porch songs, in the way children listen, in the quiet nod of neighbors who once looked away, but now look back with a kind of awe. In Dust Hollow, legends were rare, but one took root on the edge of town, in a house built not from lumber and nails, but from grace, grit, and two people who refused to give up on the idea that love, even imperfect, wounded love, was still worth choosing. Every single day. Eliza Hartley wasn't saved. She didn't fall into the arms of a hero who washed her past clean. She didn't change who she was to become worthy of love. No, Eliza chose love. She chose it knowing the world would whisper, would judge, would twist her truth into shame. And still, she chose to believe she was more than her past, that she deserved something better than survival. Silas Maddox didn't rescue her. He didn't play the part of the man who fixed a broken woman. He didn't take pity. He simply saw her, as she was, not cleaned up or repented, not rewritten, but real. And he loved her because of that. Together, they didn't rewrite history. They wrote a new kind of ending, one where love isn't about innocence, but resilience. One where two people, scarred and silent, built something soft from the hardest parts of their lives. We live in a world, then and now, that too often romanticizes purity. We're told that only the untouched, the unblemished, the unquestioned are worthy of the storybook ending. But what if that's wrong? What if the truest form of purity is survival? What if courage, the kind it takes to keep going when everything tells you you're not enough, is a greater virtue than perfection? Eliza was not loved in spite of her past. She was loved because she lived through it, because she carried the fire of it in her voice and the quiet defiance of it in her gaze, because she never lied about who she was, even when the world punished her for it. And Silas, grieving, gruff, full of grief he didn't speak aloud, didn't need someone perfect. He needed someone real, someone who knew what it meant to stay when it would have been easier to run. So let them talk. Let the whispers come. Because in the end, it wasn't the town that gave Eliza and Silas their story. It was them. And love, real love, doesn't ask for silence. It listens louder. Maybe this story happened long ago, beneath prairie skies and wooden porches, but its truth is timeless. Because how many Elizas still walk among us today? Women told they're too much of one thing, not enough of another. Judged not by who they are now, but by where they've been. And how many Silases, quiet men who've lost more than they say, still wait, not for perfection, but for someone who sees them fully? In today's world, where so much is curated, filtered, and staged, maybe we've forgotten how brave it is to be real, to admit we've been broken, to love without pretending. So here's the question: what matters more, where a person comes from, or what they choose to build with their future? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever judged someone too quickly, or been judged yourself? Do you believe people deserve second chances, even when their pasts are messy? Tell us in the comments below. Let's start a conversation that matters. And if this story touched something in your heart or reminded you of someone you love, don't forget to click like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you won't miss the next story here on Wild Hearts West Stories. Thank you for spending time with us. Whether you're listening from a front porch, a quiet kitchen, or somewhere in between, just know the stories we tell still matter. And the love we fight for, especially the imperfect kind, is always worth it. Until next time, partner.